When the lawyer read Dad's will at his funeral reception, Maya Chen watched her older brother Derek inherit $200,000 while she inherited Dad's massive credit card debt. 3 weeks later, she discovered a hidden safe deposit box that changed everything. Sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who claim to love you, and sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or wondered if fighting for what's right is worth the cost, this story might resonate with you. Maya's journey from family scapegoat to rightful heir taught her that sometimes the most important battles are the ones nobody expects you to win. Maya Chen had always known she was the afterthought in the Chen family dynamic. At 34, she had long accepted that her 40-year-old brother Derek occupied the golden throne in their parents' hearts, while she existed somewhere in the peripheral shadows of their affection. This reality had shaped her into someone who sought validation through achievement rather than birthright, someone who worked twice as hard for half the recognition. The funeral of Dr. Harold Chen took place on a gray October morning in Portland, Oregon. Harold had been a respected cardiologist who built his practice from nothing after immigrating from Taiwan in the 1970s. His death from a sudden heart attack at 68 had shocked the medical community and devastated his family, though Maya suspected the devastation was distributed unevenly among the surviving members. Dr. Chen had been the kind of father who measured love in expectations. For Derek, those expectations had always been gentle suggestions wrapped in encouragement. For Maya, they had been insurmountable standards that shifted higher each time she managed to reach them. Derek had coasted through medical school on charm and just enough competence to pass, eventually becoming a dermatologist who specialized in cosmetic procedures for wealthy clients in Beverly Hills. Maya had graduated summa cum laude from law school and spent the past decade working as a public defender in Portland, earning a fraction of Derek's income while handling cases that actually mattered to society. The irony was not lost on her that she had chosen to fight for justice, while Derek had chosen to fight wrinkles, yet their father had always introduced Derek as his doctor son and Maya as his daughter who was also a lawyer. The distinction had been subtle but consistent, a lifetime of small cuts that had taught Maya to expect disappointment from the people who were supposed to champion her. The funeral reception was held at the Chen family home in the affluent West Hills neighborhood, the same house where Maya and Derek had grown up. Maya moved through the crowd of mourners with practiced efficiency, accepting condolences and managing logistics, while Derek held court near the fireplace, regaling family friends with carefully edited stories about their father's final months. Maya had been the one visiting their father weekly, handling his medical appointments when his health began declining, managing his affairs as his body failed him. Derek had flown up from Los Angeles twice in the past year, each visit carefully timed around his vacation schedule. Patricia Chen, Maya's mother, had spent the morning in a sedated haze of grief and prescription medication. She was a petite woman who had built her identity around being the wife of a successful doctor, and Harold's death had left her unmoored in ways that prescription pills could numb but not heal. Maya had been managing Patricia's emotional needs for years, long before her father's death, serving as translator and mediator in a family where direct communication was often seen as confrontational. Eleanor Whitfield, their father's estate attorney, arrived at the reception carrying a leather briefcase that seemed to command attention despite her attempts to remain unobtrusive. Eleanor was a sharp woman in her 50s who had handled the Chen family's legal affairs for over 2 decades. Maya knew her professionally, having worked opposing sides on a few cases over the years, and had always respected Eleanor's thoroughness and integrity. As the afternoon wore on and guests began to depart, Eleanor approached Maya near the kitchen, where she had been overseeing the catering staff and ensuring the reception ran smoothly. The parallels to another kitchen, another family gathering, where she had been relegated to service rather than celebration, were not lost on Maya, though this felt different. Here, she had chosen to help because someone needed to handle the details, not because someone had decided she belonged with the staff. Eleanor's expression was professional, but tinged with something Maya couldn't quite identify. Sympathy, perhaps, or concern. She had known the Chen family long enough to understand their dynamics, had seen how Harold's will had been structured and restructured over the years as his relationship with his children evolved. The formal reading of the will took place in Harold's study, a wood-paneled room lined with medical textbooks and framed diplomas that had always felt more like a shrine to achievement than a place for relaxation. Maya, Derek, and Patricia gathered around Harold's massive oak desk while Eleanor opened her briefcase with the gravity befitting the moment. Maya had expected little from her father's estate. Harold had never hidden his belief that Derek, as the eldest son and fellow physician, was the natural heir to the Chen legacy. Maya had built her life around independence, knowing that her parents' financial support had always come with strings attached and conditions that usually involved changing something fundamental about herself. Eleanor began with the standard legal preamble before moving to the specific bequests. Patricia would inherit the house and Harold's retirement accounts, ensuring her financial security for the remainder of her life. This was expected and appropriate. Harold had always been devoted to his wife, even if that devotion had sometimes come at the expense of clear communication with his children. Then came the moment that would reshape Maya's understanding of her place in the family hierarchy.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Eleanor cleared her throat and read from the document with careful precision. To Derek Chen, Harold bequeathed the sum of $200,000, along with his collection of vintage medical instruments and his library of rare medical texts. The inheritance was substantial, but not surprising given Derek's status as the favored son and fellow physician. To Maya Chen, Harold bequeathed responsibility for all outstanding debts and financial obligations of the estate, including approximately $87,000 in credit card debt that had accumulated during his final illness. Maya would also inherit Harold's personal papers and what Eleanor described as various items of sentimental value. The words hit Maya like a physical blow, though she managed to keep her expression neutral through years of practice in courtrooms where showing emotion was seen as weakness. Derek's inheritance would set him up comfortably, allowing him to expand his cosmetic surgery practice or invest in the luxury lifestyle he had always cultivated. Maya's inheritance would saddle her with debt that would take years to pay off on her public defender salary. Derek's reaction was a mixture of satisfaction and carefully performed surprise. He expressed appropriate concern for Maya's situation while making it clear that their father's decision must have been based on sound reasoning that they should respect. Patricia, still medicated and emotionally fragile, simply nodded and agreed that Harold must have known what he was doing. Maya excused herself from the study and walked out to her father's garden, a meticulously maintained space where Harold had spent his retirement years cultivating roses and contemplating his legacy. The October air was crisp and carried the scent of dying leaves, a reminder that even the most beautiful things eventually fade and fall. Standing among her father's roses, Maya tried to process what had just happened. The financial burden was significant but manageable. She had always lived modestly and could absorb the debt over time. What stung was the symbolism, the final confirmation that even in death, Harold saw her as the child who needed to be taught responsibility, while Derek was rewarded for simply existing. She thought about the past year, the countless hours spent researching treatment options for Harold's condition, driving him to appointments when Patricia was too overwhelmed to cope, managing his medications, and communicating with his doctors. She had put her own life on hold to care for a father who had never quite figured out how to show her the same affection he had always showered on Derek. Derek found her in the garden an hour later, having shed his funeral suit jacket and loosened his tie in a way that made him look younger and less formal than his cosmetic surgery practice usually required. He approached with the careful demeanor of someone who wanted to appear concerned with actually taking responsibility for anything. Maya had always found Derek's approach to family relationships fascinating in a detached, professional way. He had mastered the art of appearing supportive while avoiding any actual commitment or sacrifice. He could express sympathy without offering solutions, show concern without taking action, maintain plausible deniability while benefiting from situations that harmed others.
Derek began by acknowledging that the inheritance distribution must have come as a shock, though his tone suggested that Maya should have expected something like this. He reminded her that their father had always believed in teaching lessons through experience, that perhaps Harold had seen the debt as an opportunity for Maya to demonstrate her financial responsibility and legal expertise. The conversation that followed revealed the depth of Derek's self-serving worldview and his complete inability to understand how his privilege had shaped his opportunities. He suggested that Maya's inheritance might actually be a gift in disguise, a chance to prove herself worthy of future family support. He offered to lend her money to help with the debt, but only after making it clear that such assistance would come with expectations and conditions that would essentially put Maya in his debt both financially and emotionally. Maya listened to her brother's rationalization with the same detached attention she brought to closing arguments from prosecutors who had weak cases but strong convictions. Derek genuinely believed that he deserved his inheritance based on merit, despite the fact that his medical career had been subsidized by Harold's connections and financial support in ways that Maya's legal career had never been. The most revealing moment came when Derek suggested that Maya might want to consider a career change, perhaps moving into corporate law where her earning potential would be higher and her lifestyle more in line with family expectations. He seemed genuinely puzzled by her choice to work as a public defender when she could be making significantly more money in private practice. Maya realized in that moment that Derek had never understood her motivations, had never grasped that she had chosen public service not because she couldn't succeed in private practice, but because she believed in fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. He saw her career as a failure of ambition rather than a success of values, a mistake to be corrected rather than a calling to be respected. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across Harold's garden, Maya made a decision that would shape everything that followed. She would not accept this inheritance distribution as the final word on her father's intentions or her value as a daughter. She would investigate, using the legal skills that Harold had never quite appreciated, to determine whether this will truly represented her father's final wishes or whether there were factors she didn't understand. That evening, after Derek had returned to his hotel and Patricia had retreated to her bedroom with another round of sedatives, Maya sat in her father's study, surrounded by the medical texts and diplomas that had defined his professional identity. She began methodically reviewing the financial documents Eleanor had left for her, searching for clues that might explain Harold's decision to burden her with debt while rewarding Derek with wealth. The credit card statements revealed a pattern of spending that seemed inconsistent with her father's usual frugality. Large cash advances, payments to unfamiliar companies, charges for services that made no sense in the context of Harold's retirement lifestyle. The debt had accumulated rapidly over the past 18 months, coinciding with Derek's increasing requests for financial assistance with his practice expansion. Maya's legal training had taught her to follow money trails and question coincidences. The timing of Harold's debt accumulation and Derek's financial needs seemed too convenient to be random. She began to suspect that there might be more to this inheritance story than a simple preference for one child over another. The next morning, Maya called Eleanor's office and requested a meeting to discuss the estate administration process.
She wanted to understand how Harold had structured his financial affairs in his final years, whether there had been previous versions of the will, and what legal options existed for challenging estate distributions that seemed inconsistent with standard practices. Eleanor agreed to meet that afternoon, and Maya spent the morning preparing questions that would help her understand not just what Harold had done, but why he had made decisions that seemed designed to punish her while rewarding Derek. She approached the investigation with the same methodical attention she brought to her most complex cases, determined to uncover the truth regardless of where it might lead. The meeting with Eleanor took place in the attorney's downtown office, a space that reflected both professional success and understated elegance. Eleanor had always impressed Maya as someone who measured her words carefully and chose her battles strategically. She was the kind of lawyer Maya aspired to become, someone who wielded influence through competence and integrity rather than aggression or manipulation. Eleanor's initial responses to Maya's questions were professionally appropriate but somewhat guarded. She confirmed that Harold had updated his will several times over the past 5 years, each revision reflecting changes in his financial circumstances and family relationships.
The final version, signed just 6 months before his death, had been Harold's decision after extensive discussions with Eleanor about his goals for the estate distribution. Maya pressed for more details about those discussions, using her trial experience to ask follow-up questions that revealed information Eleanor might not have volunteered initially. Gradually, a more complex picture began to emerge. Harold had been troubled by Derek's financial requests, concerned about his son's spending habits and business judgment. He had also been frustrated by what he saw as Maya's unwillingness to accept family financial support, interpreting her independence as rejection of family connection. The most significant revelation came when Eleanor mentioned that Harold had maintained a safe deposit box at Pacific Northwest Bank, a detail that had not been included in the initial estate inventory. Harold had apparently told Eleanor about the box several months before his death, but had been vague about its contents, suggesting it contained personal documents and items he wanted to keep private. Maya felt her pulse quicken as she processed this information. Safe deposit boxes were often used to store important documents, including alternative versions of wills, insurance policies, or other financial instruments that could significantly impact estate distributions. If Harold had been reconsidering his estate plans in his final months, evidence of those deliberations might be in that box. Eleanor provided Maya with the necessary documentation to access the safe deposit box as the executor of Harold's personal effects. The bank visit would have to wait until the following week due to administrative procedures, but Maya left the attorney's office with renewed hope that she might find answers to questions that had been haunting her since the will reading. That weekend, Maya threw herself into researching Harold's financial history with the intensity she usually reserved for preparing capital cases. She contacted banks, credit card companies, and service providers, using her legal credentials and executor status to gather information about Harold's final year of financial activity. The picture that emerged was troubling and confusing. Harold, who had been financially conservative his entire life, had suddenly begun making large cash withdrawals and unusual purchases. Credit card advances had been used to pay for services from companies that Maya couldn't identify through normal business searches. Money had moved through Harold's accounts in patterns that suggested either medical bills that weren't covered by insurance or payments for services that Harold had wanted to keep private. Maya also discovered that Derek had received at least $40,000 from Harold over the past 18 months, money that had been described as loans for practice expansion but had never been formalized with any documentation or repayment schedule. The timing of these payments coincided with Derek's requests for help and Harold's increasing financial stress, suggesting that Harold might have gone into debt partly to support Derek's business ventures. Sunday evening, Maya sat in her small apartment reviewing her findings and preparing for the safe deposit box visit the following week. Her apartment was a modest one-bedroom space in southeast Portland that reflected her values more than her income. Books lined every wall, most of them related to criminal justice reform or civil rights law. Her furniture was functional rather than decorative, chosen for comfort and durability rather than style. The contrast between her living situation and Derek's Beverly Hills lifestyle had never bothered Maya before, but now it seemed to symbolize the fundamental differences in how they approached life and family obligations. Derek had always accepted family financial support as his birthright, while Maya had worked to minimize her dependence on Harold and Patricia, seeing independence as a mark of maturity and respect. As she prepared for bed that night, Maya found herself thinking about her father in ways she hadn't allowed herself to explore while he was alive. Harold had been a complex man, shaped by his immigrant experience and his determination to succeed in American medicine. He had worked incredibly hard to build his practice and provide for his family, but he had never quite learned how to express affection in ways that didn't involve expectations or conditions. Maya had always assumed that Harold's favoritism toward Derek was based on gender, cultural expectations, or professional similarity. Now she wondered if there might have been more nuanced factors at play, whether Harold's final decisions about the estate reflect regret, manipulation, or circumstances she didn't fully understand. The safe deposit box visit was scheduled for Tuesday morning, and Maya found herself both eager and anxious about what she might discover. If the box contained evidence that contradicted the will reading, she would face difficult decisions about how to proceed. Challenging the estate distribution would likely destroy what remained of her relationship with Derek and Patricia, but accepting an unjust outcome would mean living with the financial burden and emotional wound for the rest of her life. Maya had built her career on the principle that justice was worth fighting for, even when the personal costs were high. She had represented clients who had been wronged by systems and individuals with more power and resources, had fought cases where victory seemed impossible but the cause was righteous. Now she faced the possibility of applying those same principles to her own family situation, knowing that the personal stakes would be higher than any case she had ever handled. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical October weather in Portland that matched Maya's emotional state as she drove downtown to Pacific Northwest Bank. The bank was located in a renovated historic building that managed to feel both imposing and welcoming, its marble floors and high ceilings reflecting the institution's long history in the community. Maya presented her documentation to the bank manager, a professional woman who handled the safe deposit box access with appropriate gravity and attention to detail. The process of verifying Maya's authority took nearly an hour, but eventually she was escorted to the vault area where Harold's box had been maintained for the past 3 years. The safe deposit box was larger than Maya had expected, suggesting that Harold had been storing more than just documents. The bank employee withdrew the box and led Maya to a private room where she could examine its contents without interruption or observation. Left alone with what might be the key to understanding her father's final intentions, Maya took a deep breath and lifted the box lid. Inside, Maya found a collection of items that immediately told a story different from the one she thought she knew. There were legal documents, including what appeared to be an alternative version of Harold's will dated just 2 months before his death. There were also financial records, correspondences, and personal items that suggested Harold had been planning something significant in his final months. The alternative will was comprehensive and detailed, clearly drafted by Eleanor with Harold's specific instructions. In this version, Derek's inheritance was reduced to $50,000, while Maya received the bulk of Harold's liquid assets, including the $200,000 that Derek had inherited under the version read at the funeral reception. More importantly, the alternative will included detailed explanations for Harold's decisions, written in his own handwriting as attachments to the formal document. Harold had documented Derek's financial irresponsibility, his repeated requests for money, and his failure to repay previous loans. He had also acknowledged Maya's dedication to public service and her refusal to accept family financial support, expressing regret for not recognizing her integrity earlier. The personal letter Harold had written to Maya was the most emotionally powerful document in the box. In it, he apologized for years of favoritism toward Derek, acknowledged Maya's superior character and professional achievements, and expressed pride in her commitment to justice and service. He had recognized that his preference for Derek had been based on outdated cultural expectations rather than merit, and he wanted to correct that injustice through his estate planning. Harold had also documented his discovery of Derek's deception regarding the loans, including evidence that Derek had used Harold's money for personal expenses rather than business investments. Derek had been manipulating Harold's affection and guilt, exploiting his father's desire to help while providing false information about his financial needs and business prospects. The safe deposit box also contained evidence of Harold's investigation into Derek's practice, including reports from a private investigator Harold had hired to verify Derek's claims about his business expansion. The reports revealed that Derek's cosmetic surgery practice was struggling financially, that he had been living beyond his means, and that he had been using Harold's money to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't actually afford. Maya sat in the private room at the bank, surrounded by documents that completely reframed her understanding of her family's dynamics and her father's final intentions. Harold had not burdened her with debt as punishment or dismissed her value as a daughter. Instead, he had been manipulated by Derek into making financial decisions that contradicted his true wishes, and he had been working to correct those mistakes when death interrupted his plans. The timeline revealed in the documents suggested that Harold had discovered Derek's deception in his final months and had been preparing to update his estate planning accordingly. The alternative will had been signed but not filed, apparently because Harold had died before he could complete the necessary legal steps to make it his official final testament. Maya spent 2 hours in that bank room, reading and rereading documents that revealed a father who had loved her more than she had ever realized, but had struggled to express that love in ways she could recognize or accept. Harold's final months had been spent trying to make amends for years of favoritism and trying to protect Maya from the financial consequences of Derek's manipulation. The question now was what Maya should do with this information. She had clear evidence that the will read at Harold's funeral did not reflect his final intentions, that Derek had been deceiving their father, and that Harold had intended for Maya to inherit the bulk of his estate. But using this evidence would mean exposing Derek's deception, challenging the estate distribution, and potentially destroying what remained of their family relationships. Maya gathered the documents carefully, making sure nothing was damaged or displaced, and returned to her car to drive home and process what she had learned. The revelation that Harold had recognized her value and tried to correct past injustices was emotionally overwhelming, but it also created new responsibilities and difficult choices. As she drove through Portland's familiar streets, Maya realized that her father had given her one final case to handle, one where the evidence was clear, but the personal stakes were higher than anything she had ever faced in her professional career. The question was whether she had the courage to seek justice for herself with the same determination she had always brought to seeking justice for her clients. That afternoon, Maya called Eleanor's office and requested an emergency meeting to discuss new evidence that had bearing on Harold's estate. Eleanor agreed to see her that evening, and Maya spent the remaining daylight hours organizing the documents and preparing to present a case that would challenge everything the Chen family thought they knew about Harold's final wishes and Derek's true character. The meeting with Eleanor that evening would determine whether Maya pursued justice or accepted injustice, whether she honored her father's final intentions or allowed Derek's deception to stand. Everything she had learned about fighting for what was right, everything she believed about the importance of truth over convenience, would be tested by decisions she made in the coming days. Maya Chen had always been the family afterthought, the daughter who worked twice as hard for half the recognition. But now she had evidence that her father had seen her true worth and had tried to correct a lifetime of favoritism before death interrupted his plans. The question was whether she would fight for the inheritance Harold had intended for her, knowing that victory would come at the cost of family relationships that had already cost her years of pain. Standing at the crossroads between justice and family harmony, Maya realized that some battles are worth fighting regardless of the personal cost, especially when the alternative is accepting injustice as the price of peace. Her father had tried to make things right in his final months, and now it was up to her to finish what he had started, using the legal skills he had never fully appreciated to claim the inheritance he had intended for her to receive. The next chapter of Maya's story would test everything she believed about family, justice, and the courage required to fight for what is right, even when the opponents are the people who are supposed to love you most. But for the first time since Harold's death, Maya felt like she understood her father's true feelings and had a clear path forward, even if that path led through conflict and confrontation toward an uncertain destination.
Eleanor Whitfield's downtown office felt different in the evening light, shadows stretching across the polished conference table where Maya had laid out the contents of Harold's safe-the-closet box. Eleanor examined each document with the careful attention of someone who had spent decades navigating complex family disputes and estate controversies. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but Maya detected subtle changes in her posture and breathing that suggested the attorney was processing information that contradicted her previous understanding of Harold's intentions. The alternative will was dated March 15th, just 2 months before Harold's death in May. Eleanor confirmed that the document bore Harold's authentic signature and had been notarized by someone from her office, though she had no memory of the specific appointment. This suggested that Harold had arranged the meeting during one of Eleanor's brief absences, possibly to maintain privacy about his revised estate planning decisions. Eleanor's examination of Harold's handwritten explanations revealed the depth of his emotional struggle in his final months. He had discovered Derek's deception gradually, beginning with inconsistencies in Derek's stories about his practice expansion and escalating to Harold's decision to hire a private investigator to verify his son's claims. The investigator's reports painted a picture of Derek's financial irresponsibility that contradicted everything he had told his father. Maya watched Eleanor's face as she read Harold's personal letter, the document where he had poured out his regrets about years of favoritism and his newfound appreciation for Maya's integrity and independence. Eleanor had known Harold for over 20 years and had witnessed the family dynamics that shaped his estate planning decisions. Seeing evidence of Harold's change of heart seemed to genuinely affect her professional composure. The financial records in the safe deposit box told a story of manipulation that extended beyond simple requests for money. Derek had provided Harold with fabricated business plans, fake invoices, and doctored financial statements to justify his need for funds. He had claimed to be expanding his Beverly Hills practice with new equipment and staff, when in reality, he had been using Harold's money to cover personal expenses and maintain a lifestyle his actual income couldn't support. Eleanor's review of the investigators' reports revealed additional troubling information about Derek's professional practices. His cosmetic surgery business was struggling, not just financially but also professionally, with several malpractice claims pending and questions about his credentials for some of the procedures he was advertising. Harold had discovered that Derek had been exaggerating his success and hiding his professional problems while soliciting financial support. The timeline Eleanor constructed from the documents showed Harold's growing awareness of Derek's deception coinciding with his efforts to revise his estate planning. He had begun drafting the alternative will in February, around the time he received the investigators' preliminary findings. The final version had been completed in March, just as Harold's health began its rapid decline toward the heart attack that would kill him 2 months later. Maya realized that Harold had been racing against time and deteriorating health to correct what he saw as a fundamental injustice in his estate distribution. He had recognized that rewarding Derek's deception while burdening Maya with debt would compound years of favoritism with a final act of unfairness that would damage Maya's financial stability for years to come. Eleanor's assessment of the legal situation was both encouraging and complex. The alternative will was valid and properly executed, meeting all the technical requirements for changing Harold's estate distribution. However, proving that this document represented Harold's true final intentions would require demonstrating that Derek had engaged in fraud and undue influence, essentially making the case that the original will was the product of deception rather than Harold's free choice. The challenge would be establishing which will truly represented Harold's final wishes. Both documents were technically valid, but the later date on the alternative will, combined with the evidence of Derek's deception, created a strong case for challenging the estate distribution that had been announced at Harold's funeral reception. Eleanor explained that contesting the estate would require filing a formal legal challenge within the statutory time limits, presenting evidence of fraud and undue influence, and potentially subjecting the entire family to scrutiny that could expose Derek's deception and Harold's private investigations. Maya would need to weigh the potential for justice against the certainty of family conflict and public exposure. Maya spent that night in her apartment reviewing the documents and considering her options. The evidence was clear and compelling, but using it would mean destroying Derek's reputation and potentially his career. It would also mean confronting Patricia with evidence that her favorite son had been systematically deceiving and manipulating Harold in his final years. The next morning, Maya called her law school mentor, Professor Sarah Martinez, who now taught estate planning at Lewis and Clark Law School. Sarah had guided Maya through some of her most difficult decisions as a student and early practitioner, offering perspective that combined legal expertise with ethical wisdom. Maya needed advice from someone who understood both the technical aspects of estate law and the personal costs of family legal battles. Sarah agreed to meet that afternoon at a coffee shop near the law school, away from the formal setting of her office, where their conversation might feel more like a consultation than a discussion between mentor and former student. Maya respected Sarah's judgment precisely because she had never offered easy answers or encouraged Maya to avoid difficult decisions for the sake of convenience. The coffee shop conversation revealed the complexity of Maya's situation from multiple perspectives. Sarah confirmed Eleanor's assessment that Maya had strong grounds for challenging the estate distribution, particularly given the evidence of Derek's fraudulent representations and Harold's documented change of heart. However, she also emphasized the emotional and financial costs of estate litigation, especially when family relationships were already strained. Sarah raised questions Maya hadn't fully considered about the long-term consequences of exposing Derek's deception. His career as a cosmetic surgeon depended heavily on reputation and client trust, factors that could be severely damaged by public revelations of financial fraud and professional misrepresentations. Maya would need to consider whether seeking justice for herself was worth potentially destroying Derek's livelihood, even if that livelihood had been partly on lies. The conversation also explored Maya's motivations for considering legal action.
Sarah pressed her to distinguish between seeking justice and seeking revenge, between correcting an unfair outcome and punishing Derek for years of family favoritism.
Maya's decision would be most defensible if it was based on principle rather than resentment, on Harold's documented intentions rather than her own desire to finally receive equal treatment. Sarah's most challenging question concerned Maya's relationship with Patricia, who would be forced to choose between her children if Maya challenged the estate distribution. Patricia was already fragile from grief and medication, and learning about Derek's deception might destabilize her further while creating family divisions that could last for generations. Maya left the coffee shop with a clearer understanding of the stakes, but no easy answers about how to proceed. She had evidence that her father had tried to correct years of unfairness, but using that evidence would require her to prioritize justice over family harmony in ways that might irreversibly damage relationships with the only family she had left. That evening, Maya decided to take a different approach. Rather than immediately filing legal challenges, she would confront Derek directly with the evidence she had discovered, giving him an opportunity to explain his actions and possibly agree to a settlement that honored Harold's true intentions without requiring public litigation. Maya called Derek's Beverly Hills office and arranged to meet him the following weekend, when he planned to be in Portland settling final details of Harold's estate. She didn't reveal the purpose of the meeting, only that she had discovered some information that they needed to discuss before the estate administration was completed. Derek agreed to meet at Harold's house on Saturday afternoon, assuming that Maya wanted to discuss dividing their father's personal belongings or handling practical matters related to Patricia's ongoing needs. He had no reason to suspect that Maya had discovered his deception or that she possessed evidence that could completely alter the estate distribution. Maya spent the week preparing for the confrontation, organizing the documents from the safe deposit box, and researching her legal options if Derek refused to cooperate. She also prepared emotionally for what might be the most difficult conversation of her life, knowing that it could either lead to family reconciliation or complete estrangement. Saturday afternoon arrived with typical Portland autumn weather, overcast skies and intermittent drizzle that matched Maya's mood as she drove to her childhood home in the West Hills. The house felt different now that Harold was gone, larger and emptier despite Patricia's continued presence. Patricia had retreated to her bedroom with another migraine, leaving Maya and Derek alone in the living room, where they had played as children and later argued as adults about career choices and family obligations. Derek arrived in his usual style, driving a leased BMW that projected success even if the underlying finances were more precarious than they appeared. He was dressed casually but expensively, his appearance carefully calculated to suggest effortless prosperity. Maya had always admired Derek's ability to project confidence and success, but now she wondered how much of his image was performance designed to hide financial and professional insecurity. They settled in Harold's study, surrounded by the medical books and diplomas that had defined their father's identity and created the expectations that had shaped both of their lives. Maya had chosen this setting deliberately, wanting Derek to be reminded of Harold's presence and values as she revealed what she had discovered. Maya began by asking Derek about his practice expansion, specifically about the new equipment and staff he had claimed to be financing with Harold's money. Derek's responses were consistent with the stories he had told Harold, but Maya noticed subtle inconsistencies in his details and a defensiveness in his tone that suggested discomfort with the questioning. When Maya asked for specific documentation about the investments Derek had made with Harold's money, Derek's demeanor shifted noticeably. He claimed that the paperwork was back in Los Angeles, that the investments were complex and wouldn't be meaningful to someone outside the medical field. His evasiveness confirmed Maya's suspicions while providing additional evidence of his continued deception. Maya then revealed that she had accessed Harold's safe deposit box and discovered documents that contradicted Derek's claims about his business situation. She presented the investigators' reports methodically, watching Derek's expression change from confusion to alarm as he realized the scope of Harold's knowledge about his deception. The investigator had documented Derek's actual financial situation, including the struggling state of his practice, the pending malpractice suits, and the personal expenses he had covered with money intended for business investments.
Derek's carefully constructed image of success was revealed as largely fictional, built on lies told to family members and clients who trusted his professional judgment. Derek's initial response was denial and anger, claiming that the investigators' reports were inaccurate and that Maya was trying to damage his reputation out of jealousy over their father's estate distribution. He accused Maya of hiring the investigator herself and fabricating evidence to challenge the will, a claim that was both legally implausible and factually impossible given the timeline of Harold's investigation. As Derek's denials became increasingly frantic and inconsistent, Maya presented Harold's handwritten letter, the document where their father had expressed his disappointment in Derek's deception and his regret over years of favoritism toward him. Reading Harold's words in his own handwriting seemed to break Derek's ability to maintain his fictional narrative. Derek's composure crumbled as he realized that Harold had discovered not just his financial deception, but also his pattern of manipulation and lies. Harold had documented Derek's exploitation of family affection and trust, his willingness to burden his father with debt to maintain his own lifestyle, and his complete disregard for the impact of his actions on Maya or Patricia. The confrontation that followed revealed the depth of Derek's entitlement and self-deception. He genuinely believed that Harold owed him financial support regardless of his honesty about how the money was used. He saw Maya's independence as rejection of family connection rather than admirable self-reliance, and he viewed his own manipulation of Harold as necessary rather than unethical. Derek's most revealing moment came when he accused Maya as being jealous of his success and trying to destroy his reputation because she couldn't accept their father's preference for him. He seemed genuinely unable to understand that Maya's challenge to the estate distribution was based on evidence of fraud rather than sibling rivalry, that she was seeking justice rather than revenge. Maya realized during this confrontation that Derek had never truly seen her as an equal or respected her achievements, despite her superior academic performance and professional integrity. He had assumed that Harold's favoritism was based on merit rather than bias, and he had used that favoritism to justify increasingly unethical behavior. When Maya presented Harold's alternative will, showing Derek that their father had intended to reverse the estate distribution and leave the bulk of his assets to Maya, Derek's response was pure panic. He realized that his inheritance was based on fraud, and that Maya had both the evidence and legal standing to challenge the estate distribution successfully. Derek's attempts to negotiate revealed his complete focus on self-preservation rather than family reconciliation or acknowledgement of wrongdoing.
He offered to share his inheritance with Maya in exchange for her agreement not to expose his deception, essentially trying to buy her silence while maintaining the fiction of his innocence. Maya's response was firm but not vindictive. She explained that Harold's alternative will represented his true final intentions and that she intended to honor those intentions regardless of the personal cost. She offered Derek two options: cooperate with implementing Harold's true wishes voluntarily, or force her to seek legal enforcement through estate litigation that would make his deception public. Derek's reaction to this ultimatum was a mixture of rage and desperation. He threatened to contest any legal action Maya took, claiming that she had forged the documents or manipulated Harold during his final illness. He also threatened to turn Patricia against Maya by claiming that she was trying to destroy the family for financial gain. The conversation ended with Derek storming out of Harold's study, threatening legal action and family retaliation that Maya knew he couldn't actually pursue given the strength of her evidence. His departure left Maya alone in her father's study, surrounded by documents that proved Harold had tried to correct years of unfairness but had died before he could complete the process. That evening, Maya called Eleanor to report on her confrontation with Derek and to discuss the next steps for implementing Harold's true intentions. Eleanor had been waiting for Maya's decision about whether to challenge the estate, having reviewed the documents thoroughly and confirmed their legal validity. Eleanor's assessment was that Derek's refusal to cooperate voluntarily left Maya with no choice but to pursue formal legal action if she wanted to honor Harold's intentions. The alternative will provided clear grounds for challenging the estate distribution, and Derek's fraudulent representations to Harold strengthened the case for undue influence and fraud.
The legal process would require filing a petition with the probate court, presenting evidence of Derek's deception and Harold's change of heart, and potentially enduring months of litigation while Derek attempted to defend his inheritance. Eleanor warned Maya that Derek would likely hire expensive attorneys and attempt to portray her as a greedy sibling trying to overturn their father's wishes. Maya spent the weekend reviewing her decision from every angle, considering the legal, financial, and personal consequences of challenging the estate distribution. She thought about Harold's letter, where he had expressed regret for years of favoritism and his determination to ensure that Maya received fair treatment in his estate planning. She also considered the broader implications of accepting injustice for the sake of family harmony. As a public defender, Maya had built her career on fighting for people who had been wronged by systems and individuals with more power and resources. Accepting Derek's fraud and Harold's manipulated will would contradict everything she believed about the importance of justice and accountability. Monday morning, Maya made her decision. She called Eleanor and instructed her to file the necessary petitions to challenge the estate distribution and implement Harold's alternative will. She also retained additional legal counsel specializing in estate litigation, knowing that Derek would likely respond with aggressive legal tactics designed to intimidate her into dropping her challenge. The legal filing triggered immediate retaliation from Derek, who hired a prominent Los Angeles law firm to contest Maya's challenge and portray her as a disgruntled heir trying to overturn their father's legitimate wishes. Derek's attorneys immediately sought to have the alternative will declared invalid and to characterize Harold's private investigation as evidence of diminished mental capacity. Derek also launched a campaign to turn Patricia against Maya, claiming that Maya was trying to destroy the family and dishonor Harold's memory for financial gain. Patricia, already fragile from grief and medication, was vulnerable to Derek's manipulation and initially sided with him against Maya's legal challenge. The family conflict that Maya had tried to avoid became inevitable once Derek chose to fight her challenge rather than acknowledge his deception. Patricia was forced to choose between her children, and Derek's manipulation initially gave him the advantage in that contest for her support. Maya found herself fighting not just for Harold's true intentions, but also for her own integrity and her father's posthumous reputation. Derek's legal strategy involved portraying Harold as mentally compromised and Maya as opportunistic, essentially attacking both her character and Harold's judgment to protect the inheritance Derek had obtained through fraud. The litigation process revealed additional evidence of Derek's deception, including communications with Harold's doctors that Derek had used to monitor their father's health while continuing to request money. Derek had essentially been calculating how much he could extract from Harold before death ended his opportunity for manipulation. Maya's legal team also discovered that Derek had been planning to contest Harold's will if it had been changed to reduce his inheritance, meaning that his current defense of the will was purely self-serving rather than based on respect for Harold's wishes. Derek had been prepared to challenge Harold's judgment when it served his interests, but now claimed to be honoring their father's intentions. As the legal battle intensified, Maya faced mounting pressure from Derek and his attorneys, who used every available tactic to discourage her from pursuing justice. They questioned her motivations, attacked her character, and attempted to portray her as an ungrateful daughter who was dishonoring their father's memory for financial gain. Maya's response was to focus on the evidence and Harold's documented intentions, refusing to be drawn into personal attacks or emotional manipulation. She had learned from her courtroom experience that staying focused on facts and law was more effective than responding to character attacks or emotional appeals. The discovery process revealed even more damaging information about Derek's deception, including evidence that he had been monitoring Harold's finances and medical condition to time his requests for money when Harold was most vulnerable to manipulation. Derek had used their father's love and guilt as weapons to extract money while providing false information about his needs and circumstances. Maya also discovered that Derek had been discouraging Harold from consulting with Eleanor about estate planning changes, claiming that such consultations were an unnecessary expense, and that Harold should trust Derek to handle family financial matters. Derek had essentially been trying to prevent Harold from getting independent legal advice that might expose his deception. The emotional toll of the litigation was severe for Maya, who had to relive years of family dynamics while being attacked by Derek's legal team and potentially losing her relationship with Patricia. However, Maya found strength in knowing that she was fighting for Harold's true intentions rather than her own financial benefit. Patricia's eventual discovery of Derek's deception came when Maya's attorneys presented evidence of his lies directly to her, including the investigators' reports and Harold's handwritten letter.
Confronted with proof of Derek's manipulation, Patricia was forced to acknowledge that the son she had favored had been systematically deceiving and exploiting Harold. Patricia's realization that Derek had been lying to Harold while Harold was dying was emotionally devastating for her. She had been manipulated just as Harold had been, led to believe that Derek was successful and responsible when the reality was financial irresponsibility and professional problems that Derek had been hiding from the entire family. The litigation reached its climax when Derek's attorneys attempted to settle the case rather than risk a trial that would make his deception public. Derek realized that a public trial would destroy his professional reputation and potentially expose him to criminal charges for fraud, making a settlement his only viable option for salvaging anything from the situation. Maya's decision about whether to accept a settlement or pursue complete vindication through trial would determine not just the distribution of Harold's estate, but also the future of her relationships with Derek and Patricia. She had succeeded in proving Harold's true intentions, but now she had to decide how much justice was worth pursuing, given the personal costs to herself and her family. The evidence Maya had discovered in Harold's safe deposit box had transformed her from the family afterthought into the rightful heir to her father's legacy. But winning the legal battle was only the first step in a longer process of rebuilding family relationships and determining what kind of future was possible with Derek and Patricia after the truth had been revealed. Derek's deception had been exposed, Harold's true intentions had been proven, and Maya's integrity had been vindicated. But the question remained whether justice could coexist with family reconciliation, or whether seeking what was rightfully hers would mean losing what remained of her family connections forever. The safe deposit box that Harold had maintained in his final months had contained more than just documents and evidence. It had contained his love for Maya, his regret over years of favoritism, and his determination to ensure that she received the recognition and inheritance she deserved. Now it was up to Maya to decide how to honor both Harold's intentions and her own principles, while navigating the complex aftermath of family betrayal and legal vindication. The settlement negotiations took place in a sterile conference room at Derek's law firm in downtown Portland, chosen deliberately to project the authority and resources Derek's expensive attorneys wanted to emphasize. Maya sat across from her brother for the first time since their confrontation in Harold's study, watching him fidget with his expensive watch while his legal team arranged documents and prepared their final offer. Derek looked haggard in a way that went beyond normal stress, his usually perfect appearance showing signs of the pressure he had been under since Maya's legal challenge had begun. The pending malpractice suits in Beverly Hills had been joined by ethics complaints filed by former patients who had learned about his financial deceptions through news coverage of the estate dispute. His cosmetic surgery practice was hemorrhaging clients, and several professional organizations were investigating his credentials and business practices. Maya's legal team had prepared meticulously for these negotiations, analyzing every aspect of Derek's financial situation and professional vulnerabilities to understand exactly how much leverage they possessed. The evidence from Harold's safe deposit box had proven even more damaging than initially anticipated, revealing layers of deception that extended far beyond simple requests for money. Derek's attorneys began by presenting a settlement offer that would give Maya 60% of Harold's liquid assets, while allowing Derek to keep 40%, along with an agreement that neither sibling would discuss the other's conduct publicly. They characterized this as a generous compromise that honored Harold's apparent change of heart while avoiding the uncertainty and expense of trial. Maya's response was swift and definitive. Harold's alternative will had been clear about his intentions, leaving Derek only $50,000 while Maya inherited the remainder of the estate. She would accept nothing less than full implementation of Harold's documented final wishes, regardless of Derek's financial difficulties or professional problems.
The revelation that Maya was prepared to seek complete enforcement of Harold's intentions rather than compromise shocked Derek's legal team, who had assumed she would prefer a settlement that avoided public exposure of family dysfunction. They had underestimated Maya's commitment to principle over convenience, her willingness to endure personal costs to ensure justice was served. Derek's desperation became apparent as his attorneys began making increasingly frantic arguments about the unfairness of Harold's final decisions, claiming that no father would intentionally impoverish one child while enriching another. They portrayed Derek as a victim of Harold's alleged mental deterioration, ignoring the extensive evidence of Derek's deception and Harold's careful documentation of his decision-making process. Maya's attorney responded by presenting additional evidence that had emerged during discovery, including communications between Derek and Harold's doctors that revealed Derek's efforts to monitor their father's medical condition and cognitive status. Derek had been tracking Harold's health not out of filial concern, but to calculate optimal timing for his financial requests, essentially treating his father's illness as an opportunity for manipulation. The most damaging revelation was Derek's plan to challenge Harold's will if it had been changed to reduce his inheritance, a plan Derek had discussed with his attorneys months before Harold's death. Derek's current claims about respecting their father's wishes were exposed as pure hypocrisy, since he had been prepared to contest Harold's judgment whenever it didn't serve his financial interests. Patricia's presence at the settlement negotiations represented a crucial turning point in the family dynamics that had shaped this entire conflict. She had spent weeks processing the evidence of Derek's deception, working with a therapist to understand how her grief and medication had made her vulnerable to manipulation by the son she had always favored. Patricia's statement to the mediator was brief but devastating to Derek's position. She confirmed that Harold had mentioned concerns about Derek's financial requests in his final months, though she hadn't understood the significance of those concerns at the time. She also acknowledged that Harold had expressed regret about his treatment of Maya, saying he had wished he had recognized her integrity and independence earlier. Derek's reaction to his mother's statement was a mixture of betrayal and panic. He had counted on Patricia's continued support, assuming that her grief and dependency would make her ally with him against Maya's challenge. Realizing that Patricia now understood his deception and supported Maya's legal action removed Derek's last hope for family backing in the dispute. The settlement negotiations collapsed when Derek refused to accept any outcome that acknowledged his deception or Harold's change of heart. His attorneys advised him that proceeding to trial would likely result in complete loss of his inheritance, plus potential criminal charges for fraud. But Derek's pride and desperation made him unwilling to admit wrongdoing or accept reduced financial benefit. Maya's decision to proceed to trial rather than accept a compromise reflected her understanding that some principles were worth fighting for regardless of personal cost. Harold had tried to correct years of unfairness in his estate planning, and accepting anything less than full implementation of his intentions would dishonor his memory and validate Derek's fraudulent behavior.
The trial preparation process revealed additional aspects of Derek's deception that had not emerged during the initial investigation. Maya's legal team discovered that Derek had been forging documents related to his practice expansion, creating fake invoices and contracts to support his claims about needing investment capital from Harold. Derek had also been intercepting mail and communications between Harold and his financial advisors, ensuring that Harold's accountants and investment managers didn't have complete information about the family's financial transactions. This isolation had prevented Harold from getting independent advice about Derek's requests until he hired the private investigator on his own initiative. The trial itself took place in the Multnomah County Courthouse, where Maya had spent countless hours as a public defender arguing cases for clients who couldn't afford private attorneys. The familiar surroundings gave her confidence, while Derek appeared increasingly uncomfortable in the formal legal setting where his charm and manipulation tactics were ineffective. Maya's legal team presented their case methodically, starting with Harold's documented concerns about Derek's financial responsibility and building toward the evidence of systematic deception that had motivated Harold's change of heart. The alternative will was presented as Harold's attempt to correct years of favoritism while ensuring that Maya received recognition for her integrity and independence. Derek's attorneys attempted to portray Harold as mentally compromised during his final months, claiming that grief over his failing health had made him susceptible to paranoid thoughts about Derek's motives. They characterized the private investigation as evidence of Harold's diminished judgment rather than prudent verification of Derek's claims. Maya's testimony about her relationship with Harold and her discovery of the safe deposit box was emotionally powerful, revealing the depth of her father's regret over years of favoritism and his determination to ensure she received fair treatment in his estate planning. She described Harold's letter with composed professionalism, but the courtroom could sense the emotional weight of finally receiving acknowledgement from a father who had never quite known how to express his love and respect. Derek's testimony was a disaster for his case, revealing the extent of his entitlement and self-deception when subjected to cross-examination. He continued to justify his deception as necessary family support, claiming that Harold owed him financial assistance regardless of his honesty about how the money was used. His inability to acknowledge wrongdoing or express genuine remorse destroyed any sympathy the court might have had for his situation. The private investigator's testimony provided detailed evidence of Derek's financial irresponsibility and professional problems, including the malpractice suits and credential issues that Derek had hidden from Harold. The investigator's reports painted a picture of systematic deception that extended far beyond simple exaggeration of financial needs. Patricia's testimony was perhaps the most compelling evidence in Maya's favor, as she described Harold's growing concerns about Derek's requests and his increasing appreciation for Maya's independence and professional integrity. Patricia acknowledged her own role in the family favoritism that had shaped Harold's initial estate planning, expressing regret for not recognizing Maya's superior character earlier. The judge's decision was unequivocal in Maya's favor, finding clear and convincing evidence that Derek had engaged in fraud and undue influence to manipulate Harold's estate planning decisions. The court ordered full implementation of Harold's alternative will, giving Maya the inheritance Harold had intended while reducing Derek's share to the $50,000 specified in the later document. Derek's reaction to the judgment was immediate and desperate, with his attorneys filing notice of appeal while Derek himself made increasingly erratic statements to local media about family betrayal and judicial bias. His public breakdown only reinforced the court's findings about his character and judgment, while generating additional negative publicity for his already struggling practice. Maya's victory in court represented more than just financial vindication. It was validation of her principles and confirmation that Harold had recognized her worth, even if he had struggled to express that recognition during his lifetime. The inheritance would provide financial security, but more importantly, it proved that her commitment to integrity over convenience had been the right choice. The months following the trial were a period of adjustment and healing for Maya and Patricia, who worked together to rebuild their relationship while processing the revelations about Derek's deception and Harold's true feelings. Patricia's therapy sessions helped her understand how her grief and favoritism had made her vulnerable to manipulation, while also helping her appreciate Maya's strength and independence. Patricia's decision to move out of the West Hills house and into a smaller condominium near Maya's apartment represented a symbolic break from the past and a commitment to building a more honest relationship with her surviving daughter. The house held too many memories of family dysfunction, and Patricia needed a fresh start in surroundings that didn't constantly remind her of Harold's absence and Derek's betrayal. Maya used a portion of her inheritance to establish a legal aid foundation focused on estate justice, helping families navigate complex inheritance disputes and protecting elderly people from financial exploitation by relatives. The foundation's work honored Harold's memory while using Maya's legal expertise to prevent other families from experiencing the manipulation and deception that had nearly destroyed the Chen family. Derek's professional and personal collapse accelerated after the trial, with his Beverly Hills practice closing amid mounting malpractice suits and ethics violations. Several former patients had filed criminal complaints about his fraudulent business practices, and Derek faced potential prosecution for his deceptions beyond the family inheritance dispute. Maya's attempts to maintain some relationship with Derek were rebuffed by his continued refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing or express genuine remorse for his actions. Derek blamed Maya for his professional destruction, claiming that her legal challenge had been motivated by jealousy rather than justice, and refusing to accept responsibility for the consequences of his own deceptive behavior. The final confrontation between Maya and Derek took place 6 months after the trial, when Derek appeared unexpectedly at Maya's apartment seeking financial assistance to cover his mounting legal bills and living expenses. His appearance shocked Maya, as he had lost significant weight and looked years older than his actual age, the stress of his legal and financial problems having taken a visible toll on his health and appearance. Derek's request for money was accompanied by a mixture of self-pity and resentment, as he claimed that Maya's success in challenging the estate had destroyed his life while making her wealthy. He seemed genuinely unable to understand that his current problems were consequences of his own fraudulent behavior rather than unfair punishment for being Harold's favorite son. Maya's response was firm but not cruel, explaining that Derek's problems stemmed from his own choices and that providing him with financial assistance would only enable further irresponsible behavior. She offered to help Derek find professional counseling and legal assistance, but made clear that any help would be conditional on his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and work toward genuine rehabilitation. Derek's reaction to Maya's conditions was explosive anger and renewed accusations that she was vindictively punishing him for their father's favoritism. His inability to accept responsibility for his actions or express genuine remorse confirmed Maya's decision to maintain distance from him until he demonstrated real change in his character and behavior. The conversation ended with Derek storming out of Maya's apartment, threatening to expose family secrets and damage her reputation in revenge for her refusal to provide unconditional financial support. His threats were empty, given his own damaged credibility, but they confirmed that Derek remained focused on blame and victimization rather than accountability and growth. Maya's reflection on the entire inheritance dispute revealed the complexity of family relationships and the difficulty of balancing justice with compassion when dealing with relatives who have caused significant harm.
She had succeeded in honoring Harold's true intentions and exposing Derek's deception, but the victory had come at the cost of losing her relationship with her only sibling. Patricia's gradual healing and their strengthened relationship provided Maya with family connection based on honesty rather than manipulation, though both women continued to grieve the loss of the family they had thought they had. The revelations about Derek's character had been painful but necessary, forcing them to acknowledge realities they had previously avoided or minimized. Maya's legal career received significant boost from the publicity surrounding her successful challenge to the estate distribution, with several prominent law firms offering her positions that would triple her current salary. However, Maya chose to remain in public defense work while expanding her pro bono practice to include estate justice cases, finding more satisfaction in helping others than in maximizing her own income. The inheritance from Harold provided Maya with financial security she had never expected, allowing her to pay off her law school loans and purchase a larger apartment while maintaining her commitment to public service. More importantly, the money represented Harold's recognition of her worth and his attempt to correct years of unfair treatment, making it emotionally valuable beyond its monetary significance. Maya's establishment of the Harold Chen Estate Justice Foundation ensured that her father's legacy would include protection for other families facing inheritance fraud and financial exploitation. The foundation's work provided legal assistance to elderly people vulnerable to manipulation, while educating families about the warning signs of inheritance-related deception. Patricia's involvement in the foundation's work gave her a meaningful way to process her grief while honoring Harold's memory through service to others. Her participation also helped repair her relationship with Maya by demonstrating her commitment to supporting Maya's values and priorities rather than simply expecting Maya to conform to Patricia's expectations. Derek's eventual disappearance from Portland and apparent relocation to another state provided Maya with relief from his continued attempts at manipulation and blame-shifting. Several months passed without contact, and Maya began to hope that Derek might finally be accepting responsibility for his actions and working toward genuine rehabilitation, though she remained cautious about his capacity for real change.
The anniversary of Harold's death brought Maya and Patricia together for a private memorial service at his gravesite, where they shared memories and discussed the lessons learned from the difficult year following his death. Both women acknowledged that Harold's love had been imperfect but real, and that his final attempt to correct past mistakes had required courage and wisdom they hadn't fully appreciated at the time. Maya's speech at the memorial service reflected on Harold's complexity as a father and his struggle to express love in ways his children could understand and accept. She acknowledged that Harold's favoritism toward Derek had been painful and unfair, but she also recognized that his change of heart in his final months had demonstrated growth and genuine regret for past mistakes. Patricia's comments at the memorial focused on her own mistakes in enabling Derek's behavior and failing to recognize Maya's superior character and integrity. She expressed gratitude for Maya's persistence in seeking justice, acknowledging that exposing Derek's deception had been painful but necessary for the family's long-term healing. The memorial service concluded with Maya and Patricia planting a rosebush in Harold's memory, choosing a variety that would bloom throughout the growing season as a symbol of lasting beauty and resilience. The simple ceremony represented their commitment to honoring Harold's legacy while building a stronger, more honest relationship based on mutual respect rather than favoritism or manipulation. Maya's reflection on the entire experience revealed the importance of fighting for justice even when the personal costs are high, especially when the alternative is accepting injustice for the sake of temporary peace. Harold had tried to correct years of unfairness in his estate planning, and honoring his intentions had required Maya to risk family relationships for the sake of principle. The inheritance dispute had also taught Maya about the difference between family harmony based on avoiding conflict and family health based on honest communication and mutual respect. Derek's deception had created an illusion of family unity that masked fundamental problems, while Maya's challenge to that deception had ultimately led to more authentic relationships. Maya's career continued to flourish as she balanced public defense work with estate justice advocacy, finding fulfillment in fighting for clients who faced various forms of legal and financial exploitation. Her experience with Derek's manipulation had given her insights into the psychology of family fraud that proved valuable in helping other families navigate similar situations. Patricia's transformation from grief-stricken widow to engaged advocate for estate justice demonstrated her capacity for growth and change despite the trauma of Harold's death and Derek's betrayal. Her partnership with Maya in foundation work provided both women with shared purpose while honoring Harold's memory through service to others. The final resolution of Derek's situation came through a letter Patricia received from a rehabilitation counselor in Arizona, where Derek had apparently sought treatment for gambling addiction and financial irresponsibility. The counselor indicated that Derek was working toward acknowledging his mistakes and making amends, though his recovery process would likely take years and might never result in full reconciliation with his family. Maya's response to news of Derek's treatment was cautiously hopeful but realistic about the challenges of rebuilding trust after such extensive deception and manipulation. She remained open to eventual reconciliation if Derek demonstrated genuine change, but she was committed to protecting herself and Patricia from further exploitation or emotional abuse. The story of Maya's fight for her rightful inheritance became a cautionary tale about family favoritism and financial manipulation, while also demonstrating the importance of fighting for justice even when the opponents are family members. Maya's victory had required courage, persistence, and willingness to prioritize principle over convenience, qualities that ultimately honored both Harold's memory and her own integrity. Maya Chen had transformed from the family afterthought into the rightful heir to her father's legacy, not just financially, but morally and emotionally. Harold's recognition of her worth, documented in his alternative will and personal letter, had validated years of independent effort and principled choices while providing the foundation for a more authentic family relationship with Patricia. The inheritance that Derek had obtained through deception had been restored to its rightful recipient, while the family dysfunction that had enabled that deception had been exposed and addressed through painful but necessary confrontation. Justice had been served, relationships had been clarified, and Harold's true intentions had been honored despite Derek's attempts to subvert them. Maya's experience demonstrated that sometimes the most loving thing family members can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when that refusal requires conflict and potential estrangement. Her challenge to Derek's inheritance had ultimately served the long-term interests of family health and honesty, even though the immediate consequences had been painful for everyone involved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.